Hey everyone, I'm David Berkowitz with Marketers Guild, part of Marketecture, and here for another edition of AI Insiders. Just in the community room, we're talking a lot about agents today, and I've been writing a lot about this because uh, I, I, I think, and this isn't really some like groundbreaking statement at this point, because a lot of people see this coming, where we're all likely to have one or more personal and professional agents, AI assistants, and maybe some are for shopping versus business planning, and maybe it's all one thing, and there are all kinds of ways that this could materialize. But the idea that we go from these kind of like one-off like chat-based things to some persistent agent that we trust, that has our information and is proactively looking out for things on our behalf, like in easy example, like sneakerheads, that like when a certain shoe drops, and especially maybe there's a collector's edition that they don't have, it's not in their inventory, and so whenever that's on sale somewhere for under $300, like, just get it, right? Like that agent has a budget and everything, or, it has work tasks that it knows, like whenever you see this happen, put that in that spreadsheet, add it to my Asana, and proactively like shoot first, ask later. So I don't want to talk about agents. I want to hear what Keller Maloney and Will Jack have to say about agents, because they're actually running an agentic company. They've done research on tens of thousands of agentic conversations and all kinds of things. So they're here with Unusual AI. I know we're going to have an unusually fun conversation about this. I'll shut up. Keller, Will, welcome.
Thank you so much for having us, David. Keller and I have just been continually impressed by the quality of material and people that you've been bringing together here. And we are super excited to share what we believe are some, unusual, to lean into the pun that you started leaning into, insights about how to ensure that your brand is represented the way that you want to be represented in those moments where somebody's agent fires off and does some shopping for them. We've got a quick presentation to walk through. I'm going to try my very best to keep it brief so we can get some good conversation after. But just like David mentioned, we have a bit of a research background, so we can't help ourselves but try to approach the question of how to get recommended or more effectively represented through a research lens. So yeah, the key idea here is that we went out and studied a number of AI conversations that we ran and observed in order to figure out, A, how do modern AEO and GEO techniques, which we can cover in a minute, work? Can you rely on them? Can we do better? And then what can we actually do to help control or influence what AI thinks about a brand? So first, a quick refresher on AEO and GEO. I imagine most people here are at a high level familiar with the idea, but these are concepts that were essentially lifted from SEO to help people understand how often is AI bringing their brand up, very much focused on visibility and maybe the overall valence of AI's opinion, the sentiment about your brand. The idea is that in the SEO world, you'd put in some keywords that you care about, you want to rank for. In AEO and GEO, you have a large roster, a panel of prompts that you put into an AI system. You see whether or not you are mentioned for a given prompt, whether or not you're cited, the sentiment of the AI about you. So essentially, that is the kind of new keyword rank or equivalent of a SERP result. And then we also would look at the share of voice on a per model basis, and then the click-through rate, or essentially the quality of the content. You can map that over to the sentiment, or how likely the AI is to actually recommend you, not just mention. The idea here is it's pretty one-to-one. And a lot of people have adopted this technique to start to try to target and rank more effectively for every prompt that they actually care about. Any questions on this kind of core concept? I want to field just one or two to make sure we're really solid on this before we move forward.
Just a clarity, since you're in the game, what is your distinction between AEO, GEO, and SEO, just for my clarification?
Yeah. We're deep in the game here, and I've heard every single answer under the sun to that question. So I'm actually not going to provide one because I would just be piling on to a huge amount of noise. At a high level, there are a lot of AI systems out there, and they're going to be a lot more soon, right? Instinct operates differently than Claude. That operates different than AI Overview. Broadly, we have AI systems expressing opinions that are very nuanced, and we want a way of influencing them. So whether or not you call it AEO and GEO, we don't really know. I will say SEO is pretty scoped at systems that don't provide an opinion, right? They just provide links. So I draw a hard line in the sand there. Everything else, it'll be clear in 5 years' time what it actually means as sentiment in the community settles around it.
Sounds good. Thank you, Will.
Well,
I have one question regarding your prompt ranking.
mm-hmm.
So if I prompt my LLM versus David prompting his, isn't the response based on our own context? How do you measure?
You are absolutely teeing me up for a slam dunk that I'm going to deliver in a few slides.
Okay.
You're exactly right to be pointing that out, because the kind of key concepts that we want to dig into here is, well, does this stuff actually work? When does it work? Who does it work for? How can we make it more successful? And can we do a lot more? And what we call persona conditioning, the conditional response of an AI based on who's asking the question, is a really key part of what we looked into with our research. So I'll get to that in just a minute. These questions, again, we wanted to approach through very much a research lens. My background is in AI interpretability, trying to understand how AI models function and come to decisions. Keller has a background in applied math, which is the bread and butter of how you actually address these sorts of questions. And we ran an experiment by running 37,000 different targeted AI conversations. This is the way that you approach what you call black box interpretability research. You sample the input space to a model, and then you study how the outputs correlate with the inputs. Getting a little nerdy there, but without going any deeper, we studied 533 different brands across 19 industries and found a number of patterns that generalize across the entire world here. The first takeaway, quick hit, it is absolutely impossible to avoid bias with prompt tracking. So the core technique of putting in prompts and seeing whether or not you're mentioned, tracking the share of voice, is almost impossible to give a reliable picture of how you're showing up to your audience. The key stat I'm going to point out here is that if you take the same question and you ask AI it again and again, the share of recommended brands that change based on the market and scale of the brand, it's between 40 and 50%. So that's your noise floor. That's basically just how often the AI's opinion changes from one run to another, keeping everything else the same. Now, if you go and take a prompt and you just slightly reword it, for example, taking the best CRM and changing that to the top CRM, that change will then increase the share of recommended brands that change by 71%. So 2 prompts that in our mind mean the same thing, best CRM, top CRM, change the AI's opinion massively, substantially more than the noise floor. What does this mean? It means that in order to get a reliable picture of how you're showing up, you'd have to track thousands of prompts that have these sorts of synonym substitutions in them. Moreover, other variations in prompts, adding details for a SaaS startup under 50 people, that's going to change the share of brands by about 90%. So it's functionally impossible to track every prompt under the sun, or really, if you want to get an idea of how you're showing up, that's what you're going to have to do. To tee up the next point, a big part of visibility tracking in general is this notion of prompt volume. The idea, again, kind of similar to keyword volume in the SEO world, the idea is that for a given prompt, you might be able to go out there and see how many people are asking that prompt. There's been a lot of really interesting work that other people have done on this point. The most important takeaway that I would give you here is that this data on how many people are asking a given prompt comes from some very biased sources. Generally, the way it's gathered is Chrome extensions that are installed in your browser, like password managers or free VPNs, are backdoored and harvest people's data, record people's sessions within ChatGPT and Claude and other data, and then are sold out the back door to different AEO and GEO tool providers that then use that as a proxy for how many people are asking a prompt. If your audience is downloading backdoored, sketchy Chrome extensions, it might be a good representation of roughly how many people are asking a particular prompt. It's up to you if you want to use it. If your audience is predominantly using more controlled, secure systems that might be managed by an employer, you're probably going to have a very biased sample, because those sorts of people aren't going to be asking the sorts of prompts that show up in these data sets. I have some other points there that we can come back to later. In the interest of time, we want to move on to, I think, maybe the meatiest finding in here, which is that the question of whether or not the model knows you exist, visibility, are you on the radar of the model, is essentially solved for large brands. Anybody who's kind of a challenger to an incumbent or a large incumbent, the model knows you exist. If you look at category leaders like, a Salesforce or a HubSpot, when somebody asks a question in their category broadly, the model's going to know about it from a search result that it runs under the hood about 70% of the time. A quick aside, the way these models work, when you ask a question, they go and they very often fire search requests under the hood that then gather context or information from the web that they use to inform their answer. That's what we're talking about here with visibility. Is the brand getting on the model's radar, and do you have an opportunity to inject a argument to the model through the web content that it's finding? If you're a big company, the answer is almost certainly yes. Where if you're a smaller or specialty brand, you're going to need to invest a little bit more heavily in pure visibility, just getting SEO content out there to even get a word in edgewise. A practical takeaway here is that if this is the circumstance you find yourself in, if you're a specialist or a regional player within a category, don't really worry about any sort of AEO investment. Just focus on getting visible. Even the bar is not as high as traditional SEO. Traditional SEO, you really care about ranking in the first 3 results on a SERP. Otherwise, nobody's going to click on you. In AI world, these models are reading everything, 10, 20, 30 different results from every search query that they do. Just get on the radar. And we can talk a little bit later about how to do that practically. If you're a big brand, if you're a category leader, you don't need to worry too much. I said I'd get back to persona conditioning. This was the 3rd major finding that we had from studying the 37,000 different conversations. If you're a category leader, you don't need to worry about this too much. Independent of who's coming in asking a question, whether or not they are a single man, they're a college student, mother of 3, they might work at a small company, work at a big company, care about compliance, care about integrations. If you're a big company, you're going to essentially always be included in what the model brings up. Not necessarily recommends, but surfaces as an option to a buyer. However, if you're beneath that, if you have any sort of differentiator, if you're not a do-it-all company, if you're niche in any sort of way, you have to care quite a bit about targeting and making an argument for why you are the best fit for a specific persona. Because we see that about 75% of the time, the set of brands that are shortlisted or recommended change conditionally based on who is asking the question. This boils back to knowing, who you're a good fit for, your ideal customer profile, and ensuring that you're providing the model with the appropriate messaging and an argument for why you're a good fit. This is in essence going from category leaders can rely on banked trust with the model and the incredible visibility that they have. When you're more a challenger brand, you don't have quite as much trust, and you need to make strong arguments for why you're a good fit. And of course, that's going to be heavily conditional on who you're making the argument to. Zooming out here, and this is getting to a little bit of the philosophy behind what Keller and I work on at Unusual. We believe that AI behaves a lot less like a search engine. And, you know, as we've kind of learned through the findings that we've presented here today, you can't necessarily just take SEO techniques, search engine techniques that work for search engines as a channel and apply them to AI like a channel. We believe that AI is less like a channel to bring in leads, though it can certainly do that. And instead, it behaves a lot like an audience. As David was talking about earlier, you've got AI going out, doing its own research, forming its own opinions and beliefs. It's responding differently based on who it's serving, who it's talking to, taking action on its own. And then different models have different values and different feels to them. These are not properties that search engines have. While models use search engines under the hood, that is a far cry from the set of concerns that you have to take into account when you're trying to get AI to recommend you. This really has a substantial impact. We've looked into some of the stats and studies other people like G2 and Forrester have carried out. People are beginning to trust AI's opinion more than their own when they go shopping. I know I'm starting to do that, which is kind of crazy. I'm pretty opinionated with a lot of the technical gear and software that I buy, but now I'm just outsourcing more of that to Claude. It's kind of crazy. And we're seeing a lot of uptake in the B2B buying space in particular. A lot of our clients here at Unusual are in B2B. And with large B2B purchases, you have so many stakeholders in the room that odds are somebody's going to use AI to get up to speed to determine whether or not a solution that you're selling in B2B is good for the use case and good for the company, if they're getting a good deal on it, if they should be going with a product versus service solution, etc. A lot we can talk about there. So we asked the question, what does it actually mean to treat AI less like a search engine, more like a new audience? We break down the problem of creating an intervention to change the model's mind into 3 very pragmatic steps. Number 1, ask the question, does the model think of you as relevant to a particular category? You know, if you are if you're like a Notion, if you're familiar with that software, it's kind of in a category of its own. It's not quite like a traditional note-taking software. It's not quite like a spreadsheet software. It's not quite like a task management software or a ticketing software. It's got capabilities on all of them. What makes it special is a certain secret sauce that they've cooked up to make a wonderful experience for the user. So a challenge that they might have is not being routed into any one of those categories when somebody's looking for ticketing or note-taking or something else that Notion is capable of. So they might have a problem of getting routed into those multiple categories in which they play. The second is once a model has decided on a category to research for a buyer, again, making that decision, is it actually capable of finding the company? Again, this is the key problem that small regional players or upstarts often face. TLDR, it's solved with basic SEO. And then finally, the hardest step of all of them, actually getting recommended. During the retrieval process, 30 brands might come up. The model's only going to recommend 1 or 2. At the end of the day, what you need to do is understand the values that the AI has, what kind of proof it's looking for, and then in the content that the model finds in a search request, ensure that you're making an argument that speaks to those values. That's really the AI interpretability problem and where we spend a lot of our time. The other thing we found through doing a lot of client work is that this AI perception extends way beyond just getting more people through a particular channel like AI or converting people who learn about your brand on social media and come to AI to validate it. we've got a client that's working with us to prepare for a fundraise where they're very concerned about investors coming to them, doing some research on ChatGPT. ChatGPT currently thinks of them as a services company, when in reality, their last 2 years of work have been oriented around productizing their service. They've got a wonderful piece of software out there that is growing like crazy, and they are raising venture capital to scale. Most venture capitalists aren't too excited about investing in services companies. ChatGPT says they're a service company. They desperately need them to be a products company on ChatGPT in order to continue to succeed. So that's an area where AI is absolutely critical to win over. And it might not be something that you traditionally consider through search engine optimization, for example. So at a high level, I feel like we've covered a lot of ground. I hope you all find some of these points interesting and a good starting point for a deeper discussion here. If you want to do a deeper dive on the research, we can send that out later. You can look at the various papers that we've written here. We've published them on Archive. And with that, I'll first ask Keller if there's anything that I missed, and then turn it over to David to start to broker a discussion here.
No, it was great. I'm enjoying kind of chatting with everyone in the chat here. So if you don't want to stand up in front of the audience and ask a question, feel free to shoot me a message or just throw it in the chat. I'm happy to field it that way.
Yeah. We've got so many great things coming up in the chat. So what are things you want to ask Keller and Will live?
When you first started, Will, one of the quick questions I have for both of you is, you've analyzed over 37,000 conversations, and this is more of a day-to-day practice thing. Have you noticed any patterns or best practices regarding prompt frameworks? Or if were just general questions, or were there suggested formats that people used when they were using their prompts for their conversations? If that makes sense. Or did you get a chance to look into that? If not, I was just kind of curious.
Yeah, I think that probably the best framework that I would apply is that prompts are really just a starting point. We'd look at full conversation rollouts. So, very often when you go and ask a model a prompt, it's not going to come back with a clear recommendation. It's going to say, okay, well, what are you really looking for here? There's option A, option B, option C. Persona conditioning is super important here. So what I would recommend doing is actually developing a very robust model of one of the personas that you care about serving, and create a second AI model that is just a basic proxy for that. So when a model comes in and responds with one of those hedged or ambiguous or conditional answers, ask another question, right? Go follow up as if that persona is responding, and then see what the model comes back with. If it's still ambiguous, do it again. Roll it out. The typical AI recommendation conversation, at least a year ago when we started looking into this, was about 8 messages long.
Okay.
And we think that when you're tracking and doing analysis, it's probably best practice to try to simulate or replicate that.
Got it. Thank you.
Well, I have a question on this. So a persona, the workflow to find a persona. So for example, I put a search term and say, go onto Reddit, search people who are talking about Claude and Claude research and wish list. And then I have a prompt that says, analyze what they're saying, and then position my product against them and see how I can approach them. So would that be a good way to build a persona, not based on what they do, but based on what they're asking and what they're looking to solve? And then you create content that is actually targeting that pain point, and that becomes your persona.
That's a really, really clever idea. I think there's so many cool ways to use AI in the development of personas. Obviously, product teams probably have an idea of who they're building for. We think looping in product teams early has been a huge driver of success within our client base. Obviously, you probably have a notion of the personas that, you might be trying to communicate to, speak to. And, there's always a difference between that and how things show up in the real world. I'd say that, if you're trying to double down and serve people that, are already talking about you, that's a great approach. If you're trying to move into a new market, maybe that data is not out there. I think that AI research is obviously going to be, the best tool for developing personas, independent of where the data comes from. I think it'd be pretty cool. You should let us know how it works.
Yeah, I think something that we're kind of driving at or circling here is that it's pretty much impossible to introduce a single method that removes any bias from the way that AI models respond. And so our approach is to say, rather than to say, okay, well, let's try to do all these little micro optimizations that remove little bits of bias here and there. It's rather to say, we're just not going to play that game. We're not going to try to assume that we can put AI models into a situation where they're going to respond exactly the way that they're responding to your buyers today, but rather, how do we zoom out and discover the behavior patterns across the way the models are answering questions? What are their beliefs? What are their values about your company? Do they think in your industry that transparency matters more than price? Right? The way that the models kind of approach in the same way that they approach every buyer and they talk to every person in a slightly different way, they'll approach an entire category or they'll approach an entire business in a different way. And so, what are the things that the models find valuable in your particular category? Those are the things that actually will stay consistent across no matter who asks the question and no matter what additional context and what similes and words that they use or synonyms within that prompt that they're asking. So I think that's really the reframe that Will and I have been exploring, and it's challenging. I think that a lot of it comes from AI research, and it comes from understanding patterns across the models. But yeah, we're looking kind of at representations of model behavior rather than the kind of individual sentence level responses that they give, which is, I think, a behavior we need to detrain from the world of SEO, where you had a deterministic model that would respond the exact same depending on who asked the question, depending on when the question was asked, depending on where, or I guess not necessarily where, it's because some geolocation stuff. But
I think two things that you said are incredibly enlightening for me. One is that AI is an audience, so you have to really treat it as an audience. So finding the kind of problems that people are trying to solve and then building your content to solve those problems, I think is going to be pretty effective. And the other enlightening thing for me was that SEO is still really important because the engines are going to search first and then respond. So you still really need to focus on SEO if you want to be found by AI engines.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as we can assume is that even just you think about just the capabilities of models today versus 2 years ago. 2 years ago, they didn't have a search tool when you were asking, that they could use to search the web. Now they're pulling in, an average ChatGPT search will pull in 200 sources or something like that. So I think we can kind of assume that as time goes on, the models will just be a better and more accurate and up-to-date reflection of all the world's knowledge about a company, a brand, a product. And so really the long game here, obviously, there's alpha in both the short term and the long term, but the long game here is more about how do you position your brand and your products to best appeal to this kind of third-party observer that's making judgments versus how do I make sure that I get found? How do I focus on reach? That kind of stuff. I think eventually in the limit, you can kind of assume the models will just read the entire internet. In fact, they have read the entire internet. That's how they were trained. But yeah.
Yeah. And Keller, well, Daniel's asking about your own stack and yeah, he was impressed with all things you're building there. So yeah, how are you building all this? Anything you can share?
Yeah, happy to talk about that. We are extremely AI forward, and the structure of our business is very much three parts. We've got an AI research lab that focuses on black box interpretability to understand how these models work. We have a client engagement and services team that focuses on actually partnering with firms to help them ensure that they're speaking to and influencing, changing the minds of these AI models. And then third, we have an infrastructure component. Infrastructure is to help people engage AI more effectively. We've got websites that dynamically generate themselves based on a question that an AI system is asking. So it can come in, ask for a novel web page that doesn't exist, that gets generated on the fly. So many interesting findings from that. But where we do the every component of that leverages AI. Obviously, AI coding uses a combination of Claude and Codex. And probably the most interesting component is the services team. We don't have anybody who does any back office work, even though we provide extremely high touch services for our customers. All the research, the analysis, the contextualization of the work that our client has done in terms of changing their positioning, rolling that into future analysis. It's all done by robots. Our engagement managers don't, ever touch a spreadsheet or a document. They're generally working in Claude Code almost all day. Claude Code seems to be more effective than Cowork once you're kind of trained to use it. And all of that ties into a central platform that we've built called the UCP within, which is an unfortunate overlap with the actual commerce protocol. But the UCP pulls in every phone call we've had with a customer, every Slack message, every email, every recordings and transcripts of every internal discussion we've had about them, all the research we've done historically, so we can give that to the model that platform is wired to. I'd say that the biggest learning and takeaway is that these gains in model intelligence we've had over the last year really don't matter at all unless you're giving them massive amounts of context. If you allow me to nerd out about this for just one more minute, something I love talking about is how during the Industrial Revolution, people brought factory processes and mechanization into traditional businesses, artisanal workshops. That's how everything was made prior to factories. And the majority of companies that did that failed. They died off really quickly. And the reason is that when you bring a factory into a traditional business, you always still have some kind of human bottleneck. It's partially a function of the way the product is built. It's partially a function of the product itself. And these companies that tried to adopt mechanization in a partial way got absolutely steamrolled by companies that were built from the ground up around AI systems. So we're consistently paranoid and trying to reinvent our infrastructure from the ground up so that we're always centralized around how AI systems are going to be working going forward.
So when it comes to human in the loop, where do you interject yourself? I mean, I doubt that you really trust AI judgment altogether. So where is the human in the loop in your process?
Yeah, human in the loop is always there. So this is why, we don't wholesale automate, client work. That's the Claude Code. We also have pretty robust testing suites and evals. Highly, 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 highly recommend looking into evals as a concept for ensuring that models are doing good work if you're having it do a work stream.
What are evals?
Regularly. An eval is basically a test case for whether or not a model is doing good work. So very often, just like if you're checking the work of a junior person, it's way cheaper and easier to check the work than to do it yourself. So if you have a big bank of example tasks, you can run a model after you've changed it on the example tasks, have another model grade it against the ground truth of what a good job looks like, and then get a score on that to ensure that any change you've made in your system hasn't screwed something up somewhere else.
And you build those evals how? I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, We build them in-house. So I imagine you could maybe come up with some Claude routines to do it, but I'd have Claude code write them.
What are you looking at next? You come back here in a few months or early next year or something, like what more things do you want to share? What's like, where is all this stuff going? And I'm so curious because I'm like, for just feeling all these like questions coming up for what I wish I knew about all this stuff.
Yeah, I think we're moving to a this is kind of brought up early about this weird dynamic that's being flipped around where shopping is becoming something that's done for you rather than something that you are going and doing, right? For Google released what they called search agents earlier this year, which I'm sure a lot of people saw. And these search agents are, even despite being called search agents, are really just personal shopping assistants. What they do is they work in the back. They kind of know what you care about. They work in the background. When they discover, like David was mentioning, like a specific sneaker that they think you'd like, they actually just send it to you. And as people begin to trust these recommendations more, I think we end up in a world where most of what we buy is actually just kind of getting curated for us, and the humans get demoted to the finance department behind the scenes, just kind of signing the checks, right? Just being like approve, 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 disapprove, approve, approve. And I think when you think of shopping as moving from this kind of active activity to this passive activity, is this thing that's just kind of being done for you, then as a brand and as a marketer, you have to then contend with, okay, intent, the whole idea of intent, just throw that out the window, right? Like, how do we start to position ourselves so that in these kind of like everything becomes inbound, right? How do we position ourselves in the way that when the models are pulling, are finding this need in our users, how do we convince, or how do we have the evidence required to convince the model, these super intelligent models, that we're actually the best solution for a particular person with a particular problem at a particular time? This is something that I've been thinking about a lot. I'm sure Will's got his own opinions as well.
So then when you work with your clients, how do you guys measure success? How do you know that it's working?
Yeah, this is a great question. We break it out into two different components. So number one, we build a suite of metrics to track AI's opinions for every one of our customers' business goals. So you can think of it kind of like prompt tracking, except instead of trying to see whether or not you are simply mentioned or cited, we look at whether or not a particular content intervention has been found, whether or not one of these category routing issues is rearing its head, and then the specific language that the model is using across a very wide variety of circumstances. What we try to do before we roll any one of these metrics out is actually characterize the bias that's built into it. Kind of as Keller was alluding to, we don't believe that there is any unbiased measure you can possibly build to demonstrate how you are showing up in the real world. All we can do is track controlled and relative metrics to look at how you're doing before and after. That's like stage one, and that's your very rapid response. Another technique we like using for our especially sales, our clients that have like high involvement of the sales organization, is looking at sales call transcripts and seeing how often people mention whether or not they talked to AI in the process of learning about or making the decision to purchase a product or get on a sales call. And you'd be shocked at, or at least our clients have been shocked at, how often people report doing that. The final would be any kind of lead form fill, just to track pipeline that's being driven here. So I'd say for more the qualitative opinion shift, using these custom metrics is going to be the best way to do it. for anything that's oriented around pipeline, nothing beats going to sales transcript data or going to lead form fill.
So how many AI answers actually come with an outbound link, and can you track that in your analysis?
Yeah, very few people use those links. And that's actually, so I think right now that direct referral traffic, which usually has a UTM appended to it by the model provider, it's an extremely small share of overall web traffic. And it's kind of in the models providers' incentives to keep people inside the model. They don't want you clicking out, right? So we would not bank on that as a major, attribution pathway moving forward.
So what's the attribution path then? How do you know that AI's answer was effective?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think that in a way it's, I think that I'm not sure everyone's background here, but it's a lot like brand marketing, right? It's like, how do you measure the effect of brand on your pipeline and your funnel? It's hard to say, right? Is that like, brand is a force like AI that will act on all of your channels, either positively or negatively, rather than sort of being measurable within one channel. And if it was just measurable within one channel, it's much easier to track.
Yeah, brand marketing is usually for big brands, right? So people learn about your brand, and then they're at some store, they see it and they buy it.
Yeah.
I think most people like me, small businesses, they're looking for a more direct.
Well, I don't know if that's true, Karan. I think that brand is essential regardless of the size of your company or your age of your company. Brand is just call it awareness, call it recognition. But as you build your company, your brand is going to grow, hopefully. But I think brand is regardless of size or age.
It is, but they have to then find you, right? So a lot of brand advertising, Coca-Cola, you learn about the brand, but in other cases, you see it at some point, you have to have a way to the actual product or service.
Yeah, what I'd recommend just to start to see this is what we recommend for a lot of our clients is to put two things on their lead form. Number one, add AI as an option for how did you hear about us if you don't have that already. That's not super surprising. Number two is after the lead form submission, or maybe when a lead gets on a call or you have another touch point with them, ask, hey, did you use AI to evaluate us? And what you can see then is, of course, the leads that AI is directly sending to you. And then number two is the impact or the effect that AI is having on the leads that aren't coming through AI. So like if they clicked on an ad or they heard about you from a friend or they saw a social media post, and then they went immediately to Claude and said, hey, I just heard about AI Marketers Guild. Is this a legit organization, or is it a bunch of people that don't really know what they're talking about, right? Like they're going and evaluating all of these. They kind of go straight to Claude or straight to ChatGPT or whatever it is to evaluate after the awareness step. And we have clients that are in these legacy industries that you wouldn't necessarily imagine have much AI adoption. They're finding that 60% of all of their clients are using AI to evaluate the brand at some point in the process. And so then what you actually can then start to do, if you can tag these folks effectively, if you can tag the people that answer yes to that question versus answer no, you can then look at things like, let's compare the conversion rates across these two groups. If you talk to AI about us, are you more likely to buy our product or our service, or are you less likely to buy our product or our service? If you're more likely, then maybe that's an indication that AI is advocating for you. If you're less likely, then that's an indication that AI is introducing skepticism during.
Let me ask you this question then. If I now go to AI and ask to compare my product to my competitors, and then you go to AI and ask the same question, will the answer be the same?
Yeah, no. Basically, kind of due to the persona difference is expressed through the memory. We saw on average, based on the personas that we model across these brands, an 80% shift in the brands that were recommended from one person to the other among small brands, really anybody other than the absolute category leaders. But for large brands, they stayed relatively consistent. Your kind of sales forces of the world. So very much a tale of two cities. Who's asking matters a lot.
I know we've only got 5 minutes left here. I imagine there's plenty more questions, and I think Will and I love chatting about this kind of stuff, and more than happy to just give advice, tell you what we're seeing, keep you up to date. I'm going to drop our LinkedIn profiles in here, and then also our emails.
Thank you.
Yeah, please feel free to reach out with anything. I think we'd love to chat about this with all of you, and this has been really fun. Obviously, if we still have 5 minutes, so if anyone has any more questions, but I just want to make sure that
I actually have one question. It's kind of in the continuation of the last question. The way that increasingly I'm using AI, I'm thinking about it mostly model agnostic. So I heavily focus on my harness and I build it locally. And I'm going toward I'm expecting this to be the future, and that's why I'm doing it this way, so that my harness can switch LLMs, with inside the task, between tasks, and all these kind of things. So it's like the same question kind of came before. How sensitive is this to the model? Like if the models eventually become replaceable and the heavy lifting of the cognition happens through the harness, how do you see it? Because you don't have the access to my harness. You don't understand how I'm guiding the cognition of the agents that I built. You have lack of information in that sense, how that affects your lines.
Yeah, totally. Right now, models modulo these search engines, which are essentially the harnesses that they use in the wild, think relatively similarly. If you're using a custom harness, you're right. I don't know if we can model that or not, or take that into consideration. I think it'll probably be a long time before most consumers are writing custom harnesses, but we do look at some of the more common harness tools that people use, like Exa, the search tool, and we've done some work on modeling those and how they work versus other retrieval tools. So, I won't lie, I don't know if we have a good answer for you there, but we're going to work hard on it if we ever see substantial consumer adoption.
I have one more question before we go. Really quickly, of the conversations that you, I guess, use your research on, or the clients that you're working with, do you find that they're more B2B or B2C? Because I imagine that the customer journey would be different based on their clients or customers that they're servicing. And I assume that the ranking regarding your findings would be a little different based on their target audiences.
Yeah, we're seeing faster adoption of AI tools as a buying decision maker in B2B versus in B2C. Makes sense because you probably need less help. You probably need more help figuring out what software to buy versus which shoes that you have taste in, right? You just don't need Claude to tell you what you're tasting.
The bigger the sale, the more the research.
And maybe the more technical. The farthest example of this is in developer tooling. So tools that are sell to software developers. Quick, 20-second anecdote. I was talking with the CEO of a developer tooling company, and they found out that PewDiePie, which is the world's biggest YouTuber, was using their tool. And they were like, oh my God, this is amazing. PewDiePie's using our tool. How did we not know this? Well, it turns out that PewDiePie had no idea that he was using their tool because his coding agent had just picked their tool because it had identified, Claude Code had identified a problem, evaluated vendors, picked the tool, downloaded it, and then used it and paid for it. And that's, if that's not the full consumer experience,
It is.
then, that is just, so developer tooling is kind of already in this full agentic marketing loop, and I think every other category will slowly catch up.
Yeah, In one way or the other, I agree. I think somebody said in the chat, not going to be buying a pack of gum for you, but anything that is low ego and high technicality, we're going to see adoption. AI is not going to tell me if I'll feel better, in a Porsche versus a Toyota. If I'm feeling, I won't get into that. But it will maybe tell me the specs across different Porsches, and I use it to buy a lot of climbing gear, and
So how do you prepare your software so that AI can actually go pick your tool, pay for it, and use it?
It's a great question. So there's a little bit of the agentic that David pointed out. That's a really good starting point. The second one is publishing open API specs and making those available to the model. That's probably the single most important thing. If you can open up a public API that models can call, we have that for our clients with these dynamically generated websites I was mentioning. They can hit AI with custom coupons or offers based on exactly what the AI is looking for, generate pages and conversations on the fly. We're seeing crazy adoption of that, but we're a little bit away from the, book a table at a restaurant era, being widespread.
This is a ton of fun here. I know we could talk about this a long time, and with geo and agents and all these hot topics, we talk about that a lot. Given how much consideration my daughter had for what packs of gum to get for back to school season, AI might have actually saved us a lot of time if we went that route. So please, no judging, and I won't judge your prompt history in return. Will Keller, a lot of fun. I knew we had to get this research in front of the community and all these insights. Please come back, share more, share stuff day to day in the Slack. Love these conversations, love how engaged, and even when I have to sneak out for a few, love just how the community just keeps things going. And these are true community conversations, not podcasts. So hope everyone has a great week. Hope you get to geek out on this stuff further. Look forward to hearing about your own interactions with the Unusual team and just deepening these kinds of relationships, conversations. So yeah, a great weekend, everyone. Rest of your week, and see you for our next round of these.